Hey guys, welcome to the K Nation Movement Podcast. We're on episode 16 today. We have a really special guest, Matt Tifft. He's a NASCAR driver. He also battled brain cancer, and he is focusing on getting the NASCAR Pro Cup Series this upcoming season. We're excited to chat with him, so thanks for listening, and have a good one. Good. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on here.
All right. Are you in your car?
Yeah, I couldn't find a good spot that was quiet, so I just figured I'll set up in here, I guess.
Hey, it works with me. That's fitting that you'd be a NASCAR driver doing the podcast in your car.
I guess that's right.
Yeah, we should have gotten you in your racing car for this one. That would have been cool too.
Yeah. Now we can do that for another one.
Yeah. So yeah, I really I'm excited to get you on the show. I'm excited to chat with you a little bit about your history. You're involved with NASCAR, which I think is amazing. Growing up, I was a big fan of cars. I still am, especially cars that go fast. So it must be just an incredible thing to be involved with. But most importantly, how did you get involved with NASCAR to begin with? Like growing up, were you a kid that just really liked cars, or was it in the family?
So for me, I was about 5 years old when I remember first watching a race on TV. And my dad, he watched NASCAR races. So when I was about 6, I started going to a local dirt track up in Michigan. And he owned a car there that he and his buddy from high school would kind of race together. But the friend drove it. So we'd go up and kind of hang out and get to help out in the pits and stuff. Like just a, kind of a fun local deal to go do. So I kind of grew up around it. And then, as I got older, I wanted to get involved, and go-kart racing was something that some kids around me did. And so I kind of found that around the Cleveland, Ohio area, a place to go try out a go-kart, and I kind of got hooked ever since then.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, working your way up, I'm guessing, it was just certain levels to racing that you had to start basically from the bottom and then work your way up through the series and then eventually get to where you are now, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I started when I was 11, and that was in go-karts and kind of like a junior class there. And so I did that until I did go-karts at the local level, and then it kind of started to where I got better, and we moved up to the regional level and national level. And I was probably 12 at the time, and we decided that this was going pretty well, and I started kind of looking towards the path of, okay, how do we get into stock cars? Because my goal was to get into NASCAR somehow, but more of a dream at that point.
Yeah.
So I got hooked up with somebody who was in the NASCAR industry. He's kind of like an agent in there, and he kind of showed us the ropes of the garage area and how to get involved with it. And so when I was 13, I started racing stock cars, just like at a local short track, at a very basic level there, and started doing it. And after 6 months, my family and I kind of had a talk. I was like, all right, this is an expensive hobby. If this is going to be a hobby, like what are we doing here? Because it's a lot more expensive than hockey or football or basketball or whatever. So kind of sat down and made a game plan for how to make this work. And so kind of started at the short track ranks and built out a plan to move up step by step, almost like a baseball system. If you think of T-ball to coach to travel leagues to middle school to high school to college, and then you have single A, double A, triple A. So I'd say I was kind of at the either college football or triple A level for these last couple of years. And so now going into 2019, got the call to go to the Cup Series, the main events on Sundays. So my first race is the Daytona 500 in February.
Oh, that's awesome. Congrats. That's huge. That's, a lifetime of hard work, and it's paying off for you, and that is incredible. And, for you to be 12 or 13 and be having those mature conversations with your family, about the direction that you're headed, that's also really impressive, because a lot of people tend to be distracted with certain things at that age, whatever it might be, video games or whatnot, but to be really dialed into what you want to do and have that passion from a young age, that's incredible. And something so cool, I think, if you talk about racing go-karts as an 11-year-old or 12-year-old, it's almost like every kid's dream come true. But it takes a certain amount of discipline and patience to really actually pursue that and stick to it, because it's been a long journey for you to get here.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of crazy because for me, even though that sounds young, I was one of the old ones to get involved in it. Most people start when they're 5 or 6, so I was actually behind the 8 ball, and that's why we made that game plan, was because we knew we had a short amount of time to make that window, to get into the Cup Series or it's just to get into NASCAR, because as an athlete, there's only so many windows at a time that you have to really make an impression and get in front of people. So that's when we kind of started making the plans to get there. But I would say in one way I had a dream and was mature about it. Another way it was probably just my mom, because she owned a small business, so she made me do like a whole business proposal and write up to do it. Which sounds funny, but I had to do the same thing when I got a cell phone, because unlike kids now, we didn't have cell phones right away. So like that was a big thing coming out. So I had to write a proposal for her for that too. So there was a couple things in there that seemed like business decisions, I guess.
Right, right. That's good. That's a really good mindset to have, especially at a young age. I mean, good for your parents for instilling that in you, and obviously it's paid off so far. Now getting to, the level that you're at now where you're driving NASCAR, what was that transition in going from, karts that were pretty fast to now NASCAR, which is, as fast as it gets around the track?
Yeah, it's a big difference. I wouldn't say it's all about the speed, but probably more the competition level and what kind of goes on in a weekend. I started when I was 13 in those stock cars, driving 140, 150 miles an hour without even having a driver's license. So, the speed and stuff was not always the biggest thing when moving up to the NASCAR ranks. I'd say the biggest thing was going to those bigger tracks, being around guys who've been racing for 10, 20 years. And really just the competition level and the amount of fans that we deal with and get to just experience the whole weekend with. It's a totally different deal, because you not only have to be a race car driver, but you have to be a spokesperson for Fortune 500 companies. You have to be they're spending dollars with race teams and with drivers to put their product on the cars. So not only are you the race car driver behind the wheel, but the whole rest of the weekend, you're their number one salesperson. So it's a whole nother, realm of managing yourself as an athlete, but as a spokesperson too. So learning those things, I would say, was the biggest step moving up to the NASCAR of, interview skills, signing autographs, learning how to walk and sign autographs when you're, moving from place to place to place and doing events. But I'd say also the biggest thing that's different about NASCAR than other sports is, like baseball and basketball, those guys are in their, in the locker room, kind of getting in the zone hours before the game. In racing, we are literally signing autographs for fans, doing stuff with them, taking pictures, whatever it is, probably about up to 30 seconds before we jump in the car. So you got to learn mentally of how to flip that switch on and off between being fan friendly and, you have swarming people everywhere around you. Our race weekends typically have hundreds of thousands of people around there. So managing your way just to get to the car, but once you put that helmet on, you got to turn all that off and become a different person and, get in the zone and just, I always say that it's kind of crazy, but the quietest place in the world is behind the wheel of a 650 horsepower race car, which is, I know it sounds nuts, but you're locked in at that point.
Right. And I'm sure that probably was the most challenging part for you to go from what you were doing and now, you get all the fans, you got to sign autographs, and you're turning into this celebrity, and there's certain things that you have to do in order to make not just the sponsors happy, but the fans happy. And actually, I didn't know that you guys are literally dealing with fans up until you jump in that car. Now that I think about it, in any other sport, you're really as far away from the fans as possible. And a fan is maybe lucky to get one autograph from someone after the game. But athletes are usually, running in and out of the tunnel, avoiding all eye contact with any fans. And then before the game, they're in the change room, just like getting in the zone, listening to their iPod, whatever it might be. So I actually didn't know that. That's really interesting. And in terms of doing a a sport like that, or racing a fast car, is there any fear behind it, or is that just something that you've grown into over the years where it's second nature to go that fast?
Yeah, I mean, I guess back to the previous question there, we had out in one of our races in Phoenix, Arizona. It was during the time of spring training. So I'm from Cleveland, so I'm a big Cleveland Indians fan. So we had their pitcher Andrew Miller out kind of experiencing the weekend with us, and he said that the one thing for him that he was shocked by always is that the fact that fans are so accessible to us. This was a baseball locker room and people were doing that, there would be security everywhere. People would be just freaking out. So I think that's a huge mental part of our weekends. But I guess that mental toughness kind of goes into your next question about the fear of being, in in a race. We're going down the straightaways at 200 miles per hour. That's a football field every second. And that's so, if you slip up mentally for 1 second to look away, you've already traveled, 100 yards. That's insane when you think about the ground you're covering. So, I think for me, the speed has never really been something I've been afraid of or had a fear of, because it's so intense and you're feeling the race car. It's so loud and hot. In those race cars, it is 145 degrees. 145 degrees for 3 to 4 hours. So you're sweating 10, 12 pounds of water weight away. You can't really see too much around you because we're so locked in. We have 7 different restraints on us in our seatbelt systems, as well as a neck restraint and a headrest that keeps our head locked in. So you can kind of check a little mirror next to you, but really you're relying on somebody on top of the grandstands called a spotter who's telling you where other people are. So while you're traveling at 200 miles per hour, all of this other stuff is going on. So I think if you think about the fear of the speed you're going, at that time, that's when you get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, and there's probably such a big team of people that go into just one NASCAR driver itself. Like, you got your big crew, and like you said, you got your spotter, and I'm sure those are all parts of the system that make a great team, basically. Now, did you ever suffer any injuries or have any small or major setbacks driving or doing any kind of competitive racing?
I mean, I've had injuries here and there. I've had a couple concussions. I've had wrecks where I've messed up my knee pretty badly, like dislodged my kneecap, moved it all over, screwed up my rotator cuff, stuff like that. But nothing that's ever kept me out of the car, though. There was I had one wreck that I had a bulging disc in my lower back. It was at Talladega. I was in a truck race, actually. And so afterwards, the pain from that, it didn't really make sense why I was hurting so badly. And I had waited a few months. So before the next season, I kind of started asking some questions, but it kind of went away. And in 2016, it kind of resurfaced at midway through that season. And at the same time, I had been having a lot of headaches and things going on too. So I actually went in to check out an MRI for my lower back to see what was going on. And I told my doctor about all these headaches and things I had going on, which I thought was, maybe tied to concussions and stuff I had when I was younger. But it actually turned out that it was a brain tumor in there. So I sat out a lot of 2016 from my brain surgery. Was told I would never drive a race car again, and really had this whole career change in there that I thought maybe this was going to be the end of it. But without that injury, I probably would have never caught the fact that I had a brain tumor, and it was benign, so we were able to catch it and get it out of there before it became cancerous. But that was certainly a pretty scary time.
Yeah, that I can't even imagine going through that, especially in the middle of your season. And so, they did the test and they saw that you had a brain tumor. Luckily, it was benign, so they just they were able to remove it. Was there any protocol afterwards for you to follow in terms of treatment, or to make sure that it doesn't come back?
So that's where things got a little interesting, because there's concussion protocols that NASCAR has in place for drivers to get back in, but there's no brain tumor protocol of getting back in. So I had to undergo a lot of testing. So before they did my surgery, they did some seizure testing to make sure that I wouldn't have a seizure, which I never had one. And, that was lucky for me, because a lot of people with brain tumors do suffer from epilepsy and seizures and things of that nature. So I confirmed through the a 3-day test there that I did not have any seizures. But then afterwards, once I got healthy enough to start driving a street car again and doing things, I had to get another seizure test. So they hooked up 26 probes onto my head, and they're like these little electrodes, and they glued them on there. So I had 26 probes on there, and I had a metal leash that was connected to them with all the cords in there. And I was stuck in a room for 5 days. And so they would come in there with a strobe light trying to induce a seizure. They'd have me do different activities, all trying to, see what my brain activity was. And ultimately, it showed that I didn't have any issues there. And following up to that, I had a cognitive exam. And what it was is it was an exam that they would use for commercial airline pilots if they had seizures or epilepsy problems or whatever it may be, to see if I could pass that, because they NASCAR and my doctors kind of figured that if I could pass a test that would prove a commercial airline pilot could get back to work and back in the air, that would be safe enough for me to get back on the racetrack. So I went through that process. I thought I was going to come back to racing, but I kind of had a few setbacks just with not feeling the greatest and stuff. So I kind of pushed it off another month. And eventually I went to a short track and tried out a late model in Hickory, North Carolina here. So that was my first time back behind the wheel of a race car. And we just kind of did like 25 laps, which is nothing. And, in NASCAR, you're normally like 300, 400 laps. But just to get my head, kind of used to it again. And a week later, I came back and I ran, I think, almost 300 straight laps just to see if I could do it again.
That's amazing. That must have been, I know it must have been tough. We also had Josh Perry, and you guys are really similar. He does BMX. He's right. And so he was discussing his brain tumor, and the doctor kind of gave him a similar diagnosis. It was like, you won't be able to do this ever again. I don't know why. Maybe it's just to save their own butt. To say that you won't be able to do something that you love again is a pretty drastic thing to say to someone. It doesn't sound like an optimistic way to look at it, because there's so many ways to approach that, right? Like you could say, hey, with the right recovery tools, and if you work on your mental and physical health, then you could get back to where you are. But to tell someone that they can't ever do something again, it blows my mind that they would do that.
Yeah, and I think that was the difficult part that I kind of realized in my process of recovery, was trying to understand why an oncologist would say that. And I think that led me to start looking for alternative routes of getting better. And it took me about a year, but eventually I found the ketogenic diet and started going down that path. But that's really inspired me to work with a lot of nonprofits, with a brain tumor organization, and just different things in there to try and change that conversation. Because when I got diagnosed, there was no information on it really, or no good way to have the doctor say, here, go to this person, this is what you need to do now. And the problem is that when you hear news like that, you think it's kind of like a death sentence, because you hear brain tumor, the survival rate is normally not the greatest with that, especially talking some glioblastomas at a grade 4 level, like a lot of people unfortunately have. So that was the scary part about it all, is like, how is this one person saying this? And sounds like Josh is too. It's kind of a one-way thinking approach to it. And it makes sense, because there's 140 different types of brain tumors with 4 different levels of them. And there's only 4 drugs that are out there for every single one of those. So, it's just, it's hard to believe that sometimes. So that's led me to, do a lot of work with those nonprofits, going down to Capitol Hill and advocating, for different research and awareness grants and budget changes in there to congressmen and women. So that's been really rewarding, but it's obviously a frustrating thing to do too, just because people need the help now, but it probably will take a few years to get there.
Yeah, and it's tough, especially on the research side of things. So what I did my master's in, I worked in a lab, and I studied the ketogenic diet, and I looked at how it affected obesity and breast cancer. Those 3 things are really interconnected, in the sense that a high sugar diet, people who are obese, it typically increases their chances of not just cancer, but especially in women, breast cancer specifically. And you see a lot of the same comorbidities. So in people who have breast cancer, up to 40 or 50% of the time. They are obese. They have high levels of insulin. They have high levels of glucose. And so really that was my passion within the realm of cancer itself. And so that's why I want to look at a cancer model and see what the keto diet can do for it. So my research itself, it wasn't on rats or humans. It was in more of like a cell culture model, which was still great to look at. It was a good preliminary, um, experiment to do, just to see how the cells would react. And we had some pretty positive results in slowing down cancer cells. And really what it seems like is that there's a lot of research going to keto and brain cancer because it seems to be the most promising right now. If you look at a lot of the big research articles, they do show reductions in brain tumor size, sometimes up to 60 or 70%, or, worst case scenario, they just slow them down slightly or they don't grow at all, which is still a positive in terms of any type of cancer. If you can slow them down or prevent growth from where they're at, then they're easier to target, they're easier to treat. So how did you get involved with keto? Was there someone that told you about it? Was there a doctor that referred you to keto?
So for me, it was actually a friend of mine. She had a brain tumor as well, and she worked at the National Brain Tumor Society. So it's probably a similar person that Josh was turned on to it with too. So for me, I was struggling in 2017 with just brain fog, and even though I was completely healthy as far as a bill of health there, I just didn't feel myself. I felt very inflamed. I felt very sick and just kind of, if I look back at the pictures now, it's very puffy. I put on a lot of weight after the surgery. Between the anesthesia, I reacted really badly to that. The steroids that I had to take after the surgery, I had this just insane appetite. I mean, I just eat everything. It just makes you do that. So I put on a good bit of weight, and so she kind of recommended it to me. And not only did I originally do it for the mental clarity and the brain fog there, it cleared that up. And as time went on, I could kind of see which foods were giving me bad inflammation and making my head not feel that great. And I'd start cutting those out and refining what I was doing. But it's interesting you talk about the different studies and stuff going on with keto. That was one of the organizations that was doing a clinical trial on the diet and how it affects to different brain tumors. And I think one of them said it was slowing it down 25 to 30%, something like that. I couldn't tell you the exact figures, but it certainly made sense to me. And one of my, believe it was a chiropractor, they were talking about breast cancer as well. And they're just talking about tumors in general. And they said a tumor is like a cactus. It can only grow where there aren't nutrients, because if it's nutrient flowing and there's blood flowing where it should be, everything kind of reacts and fights off things as it should. But if it's in a desert where there's not any nutrients and something's wrong, and if there's inflammation cutting off the right nutrients going to there, then you can kind of see the recipe for disaster there. So that's when all of it really started to make sense for keto for me. And it's been I think a year and 3 months now since I've started it. And I think I'm down 45 pounds since I was in the beginning. And it wasn't even for the weight loss. Like I said, it was, mainly for the brain tumor stuff. But, I've had to manage it in racing because you definitely have to keep up on your electrolytes more because you sweat out. But I think it's made me more conscientious about my potassium and magnesium, those sorts of levels in me. But it's certainly been an interesting journey with all of that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember, the first time that I started keto, it was more of a, to feel better and to lose weight. This was many, many years ago. There were so many other benefits that kind of came with the weight loss. And like you said, inflammation was a big one for me. Going to the gym, I had a lot of inflammation through my elbows, which I didn't really know what they were from. And no physio or chiro was able to kind of figure out that solution. And really just changing the diet and just taking out grains and processed sugars alone were extremely helpful for that. The ability to focus, get rid of brain fog. I think in, my line of work, especially when I first started my business, I was finishing my master's degree and I was waiting tables on the weekends. And so trying to balance those things and making sure that you're dialed in and you're being very efficient with your time when you're on a task, I think is the most important thing for me. I think as humans, we want to be as efficient as possible. Time is really, really valuable. And when you're doing something, you want to be able to do it to the best of your ability. So I found that really, I had that I don't want to call it a superhuman advantage, but I basically felt like in the afternoons I was still ready to go. If I had to do some reading or if I had to get a task done at 7 p.m., I still felt great. Like my brain was functional. I wasn't tired. I didn't want to take a nap. And so, for you driving NASCAR, do you find that it helps your focus, or do you find that it hasn't really, changed or anything like that?
I think for me, it's helped my focus. I think what it's been able to let me do is to stay calmer in the race car. I feel like I don't know if it's a cortisol, tied in with the stress thing in those extreme environments, has been able to kind of level me out a little bit better so I can keep a clear head and make decisions a little bit faster. It's kind of hard in that space though too, because your adrenaline is pumped up so much that I couldn't say it's a huge change in there, but I think there's little, like, just my sustained focus throughout a race is better. I certainly don't get as sore after races. I used to have a lot of just joint pain and lower back pain and things in there that would just kind of be aggravating on the plane rides back home after the races. Of course, I get sore still after them, but it's not the lingering all the time soreness in non-muscular, sorts. So it would be more of a joint deal before. So that kind of stopped. But definitely, I think that there's benefits in that, I feel like if I crash, before, if I would crash out on blood sugar or whatever, I'd get dizzy and kind of feel crappy inside the car. I definitely feel like I have more to burn off of for a longer time.
Right. And that's, I think, especially because you're in the car for, is it hours at a time?
Yep. Yep. Straight through 500 miles will be next year. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And so to be able to sustain through a whole race without feeling those effects of, sure, you might be hungry, but you're not getting the drops in your blood sugar or the drops in your insulin that usually lead you to feel, nauseated or give you a headache, or make you feel kind of sick. And so I found that as well. Like, I will get hungry on keto, but it's a little more sustainable. I don't have to think about it as much. It's more of just like a robotic signal that my body tells me, like, you're hungry, rather than like, feeling absolutely beat up and not being able to focus on any other task. You can go another hour, another 2 hours, whatever you might need to do, until you eat again, which I think for you, spending hours in a car is probably really helpful. Is there a certain pre-race or during the race routine that you have with food? Is there something that you can take in the car with you in case you need to have a snack, or how does that work?
Yeah, so that's something I've been talking about with my trainer for next year, just to stay up on the longer races, what we're going to do in there. Typically what I do is every pit stop, so we can come in and our tires last only about 45 minutes because they're bald slick tires. So there's really no grip on them. That's why you see a lot of wrecks, is because we're really pushing into the edge of the tire and what's left of the tire. So, when we're racing, it's we have probably 4 to 5 pit stops in an Xfinity Series race, but next year we'll probably have 6 to 8 in a Cup Series race with that longer length of races. But anyways, when I do stop, I get a water bottle and actually use Dr. Berg's electrolyte powder mix in there. So it's got 1,000 milligrams of potassium, a bunch of magnesium in there. And so that's really helped me kind of stay just, feeling refreshed through the races. I'll drink that, even if I'm not thirsty, just force myself to drink that, and I'll kind of get like pep back up for the next restart when we go back to green flag racing again. And so next year, I think I'll do a lot of that. And then about halfway through the race, I'll do some sort of a protein shake blend in there with some healthy fats and amino acids in there to kind of keep me going. But it'll have to be in a shake form because it's pretty hard to get food through the helmet. It's not exactly the thing.
Yeah. And you don't exactly want to be going around turns with a ton of food in your stomach, right?
Not at all.
And with NASCAR, and I'm sure any other sport, is there an exercise program that you follow outside of it to like work on your core stability or your strength in general?
So this is definitely something I've focused on a lot more in the last year. So for me, I started doing this in probably February of 2018. So I can say most of the year I would do circuit training about 3 times a week, with a lot of core work, a lot of shoulder work, and some quads and calf exercises, and then a lot of cardio in there too, just because of the sustained heart rate and trying to do a lot of heart rate training in there. But with this being the off season now, I've been doing a lot of strength training. So Like right now, my program looks like, doing multiple splits of muscle groups 5 days a week. And then on the weekends, I'm doing high intensity interval training for 30 minutes a day in there. So I'll do that pretty much through the entire off season to try to build up some muscle and build some for those longer races next year. And I'll do that all the way. We just went in the off season the week before Thanksgiving. We start up February 17th is our first race. So I'll do that all the way through January 30th. And then once we get to February, I'll kind of start cutting back and doing more cardio and a lot more heart rate training again.
Right. And that's really cool to see that side of, fitness and diet coming into what you're doing now with NASCAR. And I think I've seen that happen with a lot of sports, especially in the past, 5 to 10 years. If you look at someone like Rory McIlroy in golf, he really started to pioneer the training, circuit training, working on overall fitness. And I think he got criticized at first for doing it. But if you look at him now, he's the face of Nike and their Metcon shoe line, and you'll see him in a lot of commercials working with their Nike performance line. And it's really cool to see because I'm a firm believer that those abilities do translate over into any sport, whatever it might be. Do you find that it's trending in terms of NASCAR? Has there been a shift towards, taking care of your physical and mental health outside of the races as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, the typical driver in the 90s of the good old boys and stuff like that is kind of going away as far as training and stuff. So I would say Carl Edwards was probably the first one to really hit the physical fitness side of things. I think he sparked probably Jimmy Johnson to start it too. So I think those two are the pioneers that really took on this whole nother level of, being triathletes. And, Carl did a lot of strength training. He can do any kind of triathlon event. He can do marathons, like, all kinds of stuff. A lot of guys doing 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, stuff like that. But I think that really triggered everybody to think almost like, all right, well, if they're doing it, and Jimmy Johnson is a 7-time champion in the modern era of NASCAR, which, that's very different than the old era of Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt when they won 7 championships. So what are they doing that everybody else isn't doing? And I think that was the main thing that was circled. So, there's guys who don't do it, and they're, I would say, racing fit enough to where their bodies are used to the heat and used to doing those things to where they can get by. I guess in my opinion, the more you can prepare and the more you do things to where your mind can stay mentally sharper is, that extra 5% can go a long way. That could be 1 or 2 spots at the end of these races. And, a lot of it comes down to the car and how the car is set up and the handling of it. So there's a Band-Aid in there for guys who, like Jimmy Johnson this last year did not have a great season, but I can promise you that he was doing everything he could off the track. So you got to have them come together. But I think the trend is definitely moving more towards being fit. And I think there's a lot more in shape drivers now than there ever have been in the, really in the history of NASCAR.
Yeah, which is amazing to see. I think if you look at all sports where it's not necessarily, a stereotype to be extremely fit or worry about your diet and nutrition, there is that trend in most sports now, which is unbelievable to see. And like you said, it's a lot of the people who will initially pioneer it and then they'll prove that it works. And then once that happens, then it's kind of a snowball effect. And I think people really start to get on board. Just to, kind of wrap everything up, what is 2019 looking like for you? I know that you have your first big race in February, which is amazing, but what future directions do you have now? And that's about it.
So for 2019, like I said, I just signed my contract to move into the Cup Series, so it's really exciting. I'm moving over to a team called Front Row Motorsports, so it's a really cool opportunity to be able to be in the number 36 car. I'm excited because it's the first year that Ford is going to have a Mustang in the Cup Series, so it's the first sports car really for Ford in a long time in the Premier Series of NASCAR. So that's pretty cool in itself, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So, but it's going to be my rookie season for the first time in the major leagues, so that's pretty exciting in itself. But racing the Daytona 500 the entire season for 2019 is just a really exciting time, and it's a dream come true, really. But it's going to be a big learning year for me. Racing with the top guys week in and week out. I'm going to learn a lot as a driver. There's a lot more technology at that level for me to study data and analyze myself and my performance as well as the car's performance. So there's a lot more tools that I can use to improve myself. And with that being said, I'm a full season now down of using keto as a tool. So I'm excited to see between the more training I've been doing this past year to the off-season work, how that's going to translate into next year, and just using different supplements and stuff to my advantage in there. Just like the K Nutri company, things like that in there that you guys have sent, I've really found have helped me in my workouts and my everyday stuff. So I think the better and sharper I feel every day is just going to lead over to performance in the race car. And the more I can keep that up, the better. And I'm excited to see what it brings. And I'm actually kind of working on a side project now too. I'm working on a on-the-go shake for keto as well. So more details on that in the future. Is still very, very early on that, but I'm excited to do it because I think it'll be a great tool for myself on the road and for people who kind of travel and use keto there that can't necessarily get all their fats in. So I'm excited about that, and we'll see what it brings, but hopefully it's a great year.
Right. That'll be huge. Definitely keep us posted with that. And anything we can do to help support you, honestly, I think you're going to do amazing this year. It's definitely going to be a learning curve, but you seem like you've got all the small things dialed in, which a lot of people aren't willing to do. So that extra discipline, I think, goes a long way. So, everyone at K Nutri believes in you. We support you, and we're more than happy to have you on the podcast to just, talk about everything. It's not every day that you get to talk to a NASCAR driver who's a keto advocate. So it's pretty cool. So thank you for being on the show. If you want to just let everyone know maybe like your Instagram tag or where they can find you if they want to follow you in your races.
Yeah, absolutely. It's at Matt_Tifft, Tifft. And it's the same thing on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, I believe. But let me know too if you want to come out to a race. We'll definitely get you on the pit box there and get to do a whole VIP experience. So just bring a friend, and you're more than welcome to come down.
That would be awesome. I'll definitely take you up on that offer. So thanks for being on the show, and we'll chat soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.